This is a quick little video showing how to process the moon when it is not full, waxing or waning. The big difference being that you get a terminator right there, and you get a shadow section, and then you get the bright section where the sun is coming from this angle, of course. What I really like about shooting the moon when it's not full is you get a lot more detail here. So let's look at that. You can see how much detail you get. Now I had a whole bunch of shots here, and they're all very similar. I actually culled, I took at least 20 shots, and I culled a number of them. Actually, this one looks pretty good. You can see all of the small craters are very visible. You always see the sun coming this side, so it will give you a bright side on the far side of the crater and then a dark shadow in the middle of the crater because the sun doesn't penetrate. Anyway, so this one looks really good actually. It looks better than the one I was using. Let me have a look here. Oh, this one's really nice too. This one's got very subtle, thin, fine corners, edges. One of the reasons you take a lot of shots of the moon is that they have something called seeing, which is the quality of the air, and there can be turbulence in the air. So you can get a portion of the moon that is blurry. This isn't blurry, this is nice and crisp. And then other parts that are very well detailed. This is extremely well detailed. I mean, every little crater is clearly shown. Let me just look at that other one again. So why didn't I use this one is a good question, because it seems to be stronger detail. Oh, I know, because this is processed. So let's reset this one and see if there's a big difference then. Okay. Okay, there we are. That's better. That looks a lot more like the other one. So it's got really nice detail in this crater chain. Let's have a look at the other one. Very similar, but not quite as clear. I don't know. Maybe I'm using the wrong one. Oh no, they're actually very similar. The differences are usually very subtle. You often see differences in, for example, the little dot in the middle of this crater. There is a bump in there, like a little mountain of dust, and each of these shows it virtually identically. So there's not really any difference. I actually find this area not quite as well defined as it is here. No, I guess it's about the same. It's an illusion, really. In the end, they both look very good. I don't think there's a lot to be said. Which would I normally choose? Well, I did choose this one I'm looking at right now. And I could have chosen that one, and I don't really see enough difference. I don't think it would have mattered much. This actually isn't as clear here as it is here. But again, it's mostly illusory, I think. Well, whatever. So let's go back to this one. This one is actually a virtual copy of this file. So we're not going to look at that anymore because that's the end result I want to get. So how do you start? I've already burned a bunch of your time. Sorry, that is how it is. So we're going to start by cropping and getting to the final image shape. I like to go 1-to-1 on the moon. And I often will have the moon, if it's a full moon, I'll dead center it, of course, because it should be centered. This one, remember, we have a terminator that is supposed to be out here. That's where the moon really ends. It's a perfect circle. So this is just about right, I think, because you would get from here to about here. You can actually see it here. So if I'm balancing this perfectly, I've got this to this. Now, since it's a circle, this should also be about that far in, so it actually isn't quite far enough in. Right about there, I'd say, give or take. That's close enough. So what that means now is that if I do this crop, in the end I actually want to crop a bit more, so that wasn't worth doing. So we're going to try to balance these three to be about the same distance, right? There and there, very close. And that leaves room here for the moon to have actually been there. Now I'm going to actually use Topaz Adjust because I just downloaded it again. I've been a customer of theirs for years with Topaz Adjust, and I just downloaded 5.1, which is an amazing package, and I've installed it. I don't go through what they call Fusion, which is the way you can link it as an editor to Lightroom. I in fact prefer to go into Photoshop itself when I want to do that. So I could actually take this crop now, completely unprocessed, and go into Photoshop. But I'm not gonna. I like to do a preliminary tweak in Lightroom because frankly I just like using Lightroom for this stuff. So I'm gonna go black and white right away. I mean, I could go with color, and if you crank up vibrance, you'll see there's lots of color in the moon. I don't care. I prefer the black and white look, that I don't have to deal with white balance issues and so on. So now if I want my exposure slightly higher, I can go that way if I want, and then knock the contrast back a bit. This is counterintuitive, isn't it? It's the contrast between the moon and the sky that is actually being dealt with here. So I can take that down, and that actually improves the overall look of this, improves the contrast between these two by not making it, you know, blow out here. So that actually, you know, I don't really need to do much with it. I'll take that down a bit because I'm still going to adjust these. Now, I'm not going to try to adjust blacks so that it doesn't have that. The reality is I want the blacks to be where they are here because I want, and you can see there's some glow here that actually means it's not really black. So I can take that down a touch, and then it's a lot better that way, but I've lost some of the Terminator, and this doesn't look that good. So we're going to put it back, because I do like the way the Terminator looks. That's actually what you typically see. I could even raise it a touch. You can see it actually isn't changing the Terminator, so that's fine. I sometimes do this though, because it raises the overall tones and makes this very smooth and flat. That's actually kind of useful. And here's what we're going to do. We'll take that down a bit so that we've controlled all of the crater edges. In other words, we don't get any of those white blowouts that people get in some of their moonshots. I don't like that. But I do want to bring back the brightest light. I'm basically creating a very sharp curve using these tools, but I'm still going to tweak it with the curves. So I'm still withholding all of my main changes. So I don't think that sentence made any sense, so disregard it. Now I can open up shadows if I like. There's nothing to be regained in this Terminator area, so that would be a bad move. The reality is there's nothing much to do here. I'm tempted to play with this, but I don't need to because I have curves. Clarity I do like to put a bit on, but I'm going to leave most of that to Topaz Adjust, so we're going to do very little clarity in this case. Okay, so I'm going to raise it just a touch with curves, throw a little bit more global contrast on it, but not much more because again Topaz Adjust will handle most of that for me. So I'm not liking this glow here. You can see it's actually up at 1% in some areas. That's more than I like. So the way to deal with that is to pinch it down. Pinch this all the way over so that you're only going to affect the very darkest tones. Pull that down. You can see it's 0. So my guess is, yeah, we've got very little. You have to go right next to the moon and then you can get 0.5. So that's good. That looks like a moon hanging in space, which I really like. All right, so we've already pulled quite a bit of detail out. It's looking really good, but I want lots of detail. A couple more things I do. I always forget to do this first. So just because it gives you the best color balance, as in it's according to the chart. I use that profile is created using Color Checker Pro, Passport Pro, or Passport Photo, I guess it says on the thing. It's from X-Ray, and you should use that. It's a great way to make your cameras all create the same color balance. I think that's very important. I always hit that just because it will. I mean, I'm going black and white, so it's not strictly necessary, but I think it cleans up the edges a little bit, and that can be helpful. It is operating on the original here. It doesn't necessarily get affected by the fact that we're in black and white. Now, how to deal with this? Well, obviously this makes a real mess if you do that, but I tend to start with 0 detail, and I tend to take radius down a bit because I want my sharpening to be subtle. So there you can see the craters are starting to show really nicely. I typically put my masking because I really only want edges touched. I don't want sharpening to apply to the seas or the sky. So now I'm going to take detail up a touch. You can see the edges are getting very nice here. And then I'm going to move my radius up a bit because these aren't tiny edges and I don't need them to be that tiny. Okay, I'm not going to do any noise reduction because I've got a low ISO. The exposure for this, by the way, let's have a quick second on that. That's an f8 mirror lens with no teleconverter on it. I've decided not to use the teleconverter because it adds blur. I've noticed that it's much crisper across the whole frame of the moon if I don't use a teleconverter, so I can live with the loss of magnification. So that's an f8 lens. This is a Looney 11 exposure. So Looney 11 would say f11 1 over ISO. So f8 is 1 over ISO plus 1 stop. So 1 over ISO, I have 1/60th, so I should probably be at 1/80th here. I have 160 ISO, I should probably be at 1 over 160 for f11, and for f8, 1 over 320 actually. So instead, I'm at 1 over 200, which means I'm slightly overexposing. It doesn't look like it, so I don't know if the camera slightly underexposes naturally. It doesn't really bother me either way. This was a GX85. The mirror lens has its own tripod foot. You would never want to hang a big lens off of a small body like that. That's pretty nice exposure as you saw. I mean, they all look very nice, and I haven't created any grain problems here. I don't see any grain at all really, which is one reason why this looks like a telescope shot it. Because really, I mean, on this camera, with a 2x crop factor, it's 1,000 millimeters, and a lot of telescopes are 1,000 millimeters, so the smaller ones, I mean. So really, this might as well have been a telescope. The moon being lit by the sun, of course, is plenty to get a nice exposure like that, plenty of light. Anyway, if I left it like this, it would be a good-looking moonshot. I could, if I wanted more contrast, I could just do this. Throw clarity in, that's too much. But like that. Or I could go here and do this, like that. There. That's a darn fine looking moon. I don't really need to do anything else. Honestly, that's great. But I want to. So I'll put that back. And I'm going to actually Control Z it all. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. Okay, that's where I was. So here now I'm going to go right click, edit in Photoshop. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to get at the filter that I installed, and I don't have Fusion, so I wanted it installed specifically in come on, you can behave, specifically in Photoshop. It just allows me to do layers and anything else I want to do, but all I'm going to do here is actually filter it. Topaz Labs, Adjust 5. So this is actually Topaz's way of doing it now. It always has been, actually. It creates its own UI. And I actually like dynamic pop. There's all sorts of things you can do here. They're all just, I mean, you could just go and do all your adjustments yourself, but why bother, right? So in the HDR collection, I tend to like these. Last time I did this, I started with this one, which I quite like. Now that's an awful lot of detail, but it's kind of cool. I mean, you can jack up the contrast if you want, because that's not a bad looking moon. It's maybe a little excessive, so you have to be a bit careful. Protect highlights pulls them down a bit, right? Protect shadows opens them up a touch, but you don't want to protect shadows too much because you want to leave this black. So you just have to watch the Terminator. Don't let it get eaten away too much. You can see that you can go all the way to black. So I'll just leave it where it was. Details, well, really there's a lot of detail here. You can boost it a little more if you want, but that just doesn't look right. So take it back a bit, and I'll just creep it forward very gently. That's just a touch more than I want. I can play with the strength, of course, which is overall going to do that. That looks pretty good. Sharpening, well, I don't need too much extra sharpening. Go up just a touch. If you process details independently, you lose a lot of the effect. Then I think you can just do your sharpening. Will handle these details without taking into account all of the other contrast adjustments. I prefer right now to go this way. There are images where I found I prefer to go the other way. Color is, well, more or less irrelevant because we're not in color. Noise, suppression, amount, again, I don't care. I'm not trying to do any noise work. The curve tool, I already did my curves work. I don't need it here. Now, do I want to do local adjustments? No, I don't have any brush work I want to do. And finally, finishing touches. I do like using the finishing touches here because this basically is layers. You can apply the effect to a lesser extent. You know, go to here and that's what we started with, so let's back it off. This is how I would do this if I wanted to in Photoshop, just create a layer, but I don't have to because they're giving me the layer option here. So I can go all the way to where I was. That actually is overdone. So let's start around here and then go forward till it looks nice. We want lots of detail. We want to show all these little, like the splash crater here, you know, it splashed out a long way. That's all from this crater. It's radiating, right? So you want that to be very visible, but you want to, you know, not quite make it look nuts where every little detail is pulled out, because that takes away from the fact that you know this is the moon. It kind of looks like a different thing. I could actually put, I'll leave it like that. That looks all right. So what I did there is I took 33% transparency, so it's 66% of the level of the effect before. I could throw some warmth in here. A lot of people leave their moonshots looking like that. I frankly hate that. It just doesn't look like, I don't know, it doesn't look like the moon looks if you look through binoculars. Your eye corrects for that color. So don't leave it like that. And don't do that. So I'm not going to actually put any warmth on it because I don't need to, because there's another trick I can do here, which is tone, which I kind of like. I don't want borders. I don't want to dick around with any of that. I don't need a vignette because it's black all the way around. We're good. So what do I need? Well, I like the tone thing a little bit, although I'm not sure I like the colors they choose. So here I tend to do this. Go back and go, I don't know, 66, 66, 66. Get a nice gray in there. And then leave this one alone. This is black. This is gray. And then this one I believe is very slightly red. Very slightly. And we're talking a small amount. So a hint of rose, if you will. So if I leave the tone off, it's pure black and white. If I leave the tone on, there's a sort of a subtlety. This is kind of the four-tone, I forget what it's called in Photoshop, but it's basically duotone is what they used to call it, and or maybe they probably still do. And it's a different mode, but here you can apply it, the effect yourself, and you can, you know, turn up the gray a bit, or turn up the rose a bit actually, really go for it. But I don't want to suppress. You can see that it actually has a lot of effect all over the tones. This is the black one, this is the gray one, this is the rose here. So you really have to be careful with this. And of course, yeah. That's why they had that there. So, I don't know. I think I'll skip it. I did play with it before and thought it was kind of cool, but really in the end, doesn't matter. So, overall, we can compare these when we get back into... so this is in Photoshop now. It's more subtle than the last one I did. So I'm going to save this because it's a TIFF. You can see it's a TIFF, and it's called Edit 3, so I've obviously done this a few times. Go back now to Lightroom, and it will pop up here. So it's a stack now, I guess. Let's unstack that. Alright, so this is one I did earlier. Yeah, that's the full effect. I don't really like that very much. This is the one I just did. It's a lot subtler. It's a bit of a different crop too, so you can really see the difference. So that's what happens when, you know, you let your kids play with the controls, I guess. I don't know. I was fooling around with it, and it was maybe a lot. So, okay, is this enough? I'm actually finding just maybe it's not quite enough. So I'm going to actually go and add a touch more clarity, but really just a hint, +8, nothing too dramatic. I'm going to add a touch more contrast, and we're talking really subtle. So that's a bit much. Just a bit too much. So take a little of that off. Take a little of this off. Okay, actually I like that. It's subtle, but it looks good. It's not quite as dark as it should be, so we'll just use a touch more black. Whoop, careful there. It's weird how the histogram shows dramaticness, yet there's no change here. But this is now black again. Still a bit of glow area here. Can't really get rid of it. So that looks like the moon looks when you look through binoculars. It really does kind of look a lot like that. Very dramatic, very bright. I'm going to call that done. So I'm going to export it. Low sharp. I always do low sharp export. I want just a touch. And there we go. And that is my moon. That looks like a telescope shot for sure. It's slightly over detailed, but there's none of that telltale over sharpening crunchiness that you get. So it's actually pretty good, but it's certainly not subtle. So there you go. That's how Topaz works, and I quite like it. The thing you get with Topaz is you get what they call structure in some of the other tools. You get the ability to get pull the inner detail out, the stuff around here. Like there's a lot of little details here that are now visible, little craters and things that are somewhat invisible or just sort of blend in unless you pull them out. Look at this row of craters here. I'm not sure that's actually visible in the original. It's there somewhere, but you really don't see it. It's just not, well, here it is. So yeah, I mean, they're visible, but when you make it small, it's far less visible. So going to this, yeah, it's pulled out a bit more. There's lots of little details pulled out by Topaz. It's just another tool. There's lots of them. You could just stick with clarity and all that, and you'd be fine. There's not really, I mean, you could go completely nuts with Topaz. That's way too much. That's much better. I actually really like this moon. It's probably the best one I've done. Where are other ones? Here's one I did with just Lightroom. That's not bad, but it's a bit dark actually, interestingly. Largely because I couldn't do what Topaz would do, which is pull all the extra detail out, dramatically enhance the white dots. Yeah, I really like that. So I'm back to using Topaz for a while. It does create an extra TIFF file, so boo-hoo. Not that fond of having TIFFs lying around because they're not small, but they are what they are. That's how you do that. I'm done. So I hope you enjoyed that. And do consider Topaz Adjust. It does some really cool stuff. I might do other videos on it at some point. It's 49 bucks. It's not horribly expensive. Of course, if you're already subscribing to Photoshop, etc., you're already invested anyway into this stuff. So good luck with it.